Hello, everybody, to our CESI Inside video series. Today, we are with Oliver Roethig, Regional Secretary of UNI Europa, the European Service Workers Union, which represents 7 million workers in the service sector. Since May 2011, Oliver is the Regional Secretary. He's also member of the Executive Committee of the European Trade Union Confederation, ETUC, and of the Management Committee of the European Trade Union Institute, ETUI. Welcome, Oliver.
Thank you, Klaus. It's a pleasure being here.
What do you think will be the impact of coronavirus on the labor markets, on our ways of working hours, of incomes, and on, of course, on current and future working conditions?
I think you have to look at it from two perspectives. What is the impact today? And I think the impact today is that there are many colleagues, many workers out there who have difficulties actually make a living under these conditions because they have already become unemployed, because they are on short-time work, or indeed they don't find a job or piecework for the moment. I think that is one of the key challenges. And this, of course, combined with the health risk, which is really prevalent. However, in the long term, I think Corona will have impacting our society dramatically. And one of the reasons is that Corona is accelerating the change processes that are already underway. Whether that is digitalization generally, it's working from home, it's e-commerce. What we will be seeing in many of the services sectors, a restructuring process, which is already ongoing, being faster over the next months, and especially when we return from the lockout. One of the key issues in that respect, and that is a problem not only for the economy, for workers, but also for society, is that mid-level jobs will be shrinking. We will have more precarious jobs, we will have more high-level jobs. And that one of the reasons for this is really piecework. And this, in the end, especially with Corona, leads to more job losses because the transition phase will be shorter. And one concern, which is a global concern, is quite clearly that globalization will change. We will see already now a rollback of globalization. Some of the services or the products which are produced in other parts of the world will be brought back to Europe, to the richer countries in the world. And I think that will be the key problem also for world trade and for people around the world.
You were already mentioning that particularly, of course, typical workers will, let's say, precarious workers be particularly hit. Is there any, how could I say, any clear vision of the potential impact this may have? Because when we speak of the big packages, for instance, which are either prepared at national level or at EU level, I mean, a lot of them, we just think of sure, basically aims, although also at, for instance, solo self-employed or the self-employed, but mainly at preserving work of, let's say, those in typical work contracts. We here at CESI, we have always the impression that there's a huge, let's say, unknown in the whole discussion how this will affect typical workers, those working in the informal economy, those who are being at risk, migrants or others. What are your impressions?
What we as UNI Europa think quite clearly that if you're in a weak position on the labor market already, that you're not resilient enough to change, you will be affected more. It's simply the point. If you're in a precarious job, if you have precarious working conditions, the chance is high that if the company has to restructure, has to release workers, they will go first of all for those who want precarious job arrangements. They will not go for those colleagues who are on permanent contracts. That I think is one of the key issues, and there we will be affected. The other point, as I mentioned already, is really the acceleration of the shrinking middle class or the mid-level jobs. And our concern is there with home working, with the ability to produce services in smaller pieces where you don't need a full-time job, but you can just basically say, in the worst case, say we auction off somebody doing piecework for services, and that can be easily done from home in many cases, more and more as the crisis proves. And then we have the issue there that many of the valuable jobs are no longer there. We see a certain trend already in the insurance company, and in the insurance company, in many of the back offices jobs that you have there and in other industries, it's women. And so we also see through this crisis accelerated again that the wage gap is actually not closing but will increase again, because not least women have more jobs on the lower end of the scale than others. I mean, our concern is what can the state do about it? I mean, what we see is that governments provide companies in some countries here in Europe with enormous helping packages. How can we make sure that this doesn't end up in the pockets of the shareholders, but this actually benefits the labor market? The key point is COVID-19, the crisis, is not bringing a new world forward. It rather accelerates the world is already on the way. The problem for us as trade unions, as workers, and society is it is happening much faster than we thought. And that is a concern, and that everybody in society needs to gather. And the best way to do this is actually getting everybody who is involved in the world of work, it's employers, the governments, and the trade unions, bringing them together to make sure that the best solutions for everyone are created, that we really have genuine win-win-win situations.
So you're also basically underlining that, I mean, the crisis is some kind of catalyst to weaken those who are already weak much further and much faster than which is already the case. I think this is, of course, also a challenge for trade unions to make sure that especially the vulnerable ones are well represented. And that leads me also to the question, because UNI Europa, you represent a multitude of sectors. Which sectors will be impacted the most profoundly, or maybe at this moment, but also beyond this moment, say in the medium and the long term?
One concern, and a very strong concern, is really the commerce sector. And when we look especially at non-food retail, I mean, you probably will have heard about department stores around the world closing their doors because they can't cope with it. I mean, that is a trend which has already been around for some time, that department stores are a dying business model as the model has developed over the last 100 years or so. So that will be an issue. We have a lot of people, workers in the non-food retail sector, and there I see a difference. There is a marked trend to e-commerce already. And when we are all now basically at home, I mean, that of course gives a boost to companies who offer services, retail services online. So we are getting used to going online. So why should we go back to a shop? And I think that will most likely affect companies in the middle and the lower product market, simply because if you're rich, you go to a nice little boutique and have good services for high prices. If you're an ordinary worker, you probably can't afford this in the future. And there it's much easier for you to go to Amazon or another company and get the products online. And the company, of course, saves both cost in terms of workforce as well as having a shop. So I think there we will see a major trend. Again, this is not something new, but it will be accelerating. And that is one of our key concerns. The same is, I can repeat it, back office work. I mean, if we as white collar workers can all work from home, can't we basically then do this also afterwards when we go back? And working from home means there is less of a connection with the company, and then the company will say, do we need them as part of our core labor force, or do we just basically outsource the service and bring it in when necessary? And that creates for most of the workers, again, more precarious working conditions and puts their jobs on the line. So it's more difficult for everyone to plan for their future and the future of their families. And there we need state action to change this trend.
That also means basically a further decoupling, basically, of the workers from their work, from their workplace, from their colleagues, etc. What are the UNI Europa's demands, especially for the hard hit sectors? Do you have any already clear strategies or clear demands, and to whom they should be addressed? I know these are not easy things to do in that moment, but what is your basically your strategy for these particularly hit sectors?
Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, the strategy at the moment is making sure that we get well through and out of COVID-19. I think that is a key point. And there, again, in many of our sectors, the services sectors, we have frontline workers who don't have sufficient personal protective equipment. And that is a shame, especially in countries that we have here in Europe. I mean, we should be rich enough to make sure that everybody has the right equipment, that going to work is not a danger for them. One example I was being told by one of our Norwegian colleagues was he is working in a hospital as a cleaner, but he doesn't have serious personal protective equipment. And that doesn't work. I mean, you can't have a system where, depending on what job you have in a hospital, you have different kinds of personal protective equipment, especially if it's not really relevant to the job. But I mean, a cleaner is going through everything in the hospital and has to clean it. And they need the same protection as everybody else. And so you can go into other jobs as well. What we need at the moment, making sure that workers do not lose their livelihoods through the crisis. So indeed, there is substantial need for support of governments, for companies to keep their doors open, even if people can't work at the moment. There we need investment, but we need to make sure that this investment goes directly to the workers and doesn't end up in the pockets of shareholders and others. Concretely for the future, I think the crisis has very much shown that in those countries where trade unions, employers, and governments work together, where you have strong industrial relations, strong social dialogue systems, countries manage the crisis better. And I think that is also the way forward for the future. We need to strengthen collective rights, collective bargaining rights in Europe, in our countries, because that is the best way to actually ensure the future. We want to have a fair transition for all those changes that's coming our way through digitalization, through COVID-19. It has to be managed. And when all three parts, that is governments, employers and trade unions work together, we get the best results for everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also, as we speak of trade union representation, cooperation, we, UNI Europa and CESI, we do cooperate in the postal services sectors. What do you think the impacts will be on this sector? Because, I mean, these sectors have been, or these professions have been of major importance now during the lockdown. And do you think the staff was always well protected? Do you think the work was duly recognized and appreciated by the public, or is there some need further on after the crisis? Of course, before a lot had to be done and was done, but also after the crisis in particular, a little bit using that effect of the maybe increasing recognition for these essential jobs to how could I say, to develop a common vision or strategy how these workers can be further protected or better protected.
One thing is clear. I mean, depending on what part of the postal sector you look at, the protection was not all that good. So there was danger to workers as well, and we have unfortunate incidents where this was leading to serious illness. Postal workers are in an essential role. They basically make sure that the infrastructure, that the communication in our society works. I mean, and it's not only about the mailman, but it's parcel delivery, which is one of the key points. And how would actually our society function at the moment if you couldn't deliver parcels, or indeed go on an e-commerce platform and get your products? So that is one of the points. I mean, for postal workers, but also for other ones who are really exposed to a danger to get COVID-19, what we want is clear hazard pay. They should be remunerated for the problem they have. What we also demanded, and the European Trade Union Federation together went to the European Commission and says, we want that for frontline workers, COVID-19 is recognized as an occupational disease. because it's a hazard and we need hazard pay, but we also need recognition that it's an occupational disease. When I look at the impact on the postal sector altogether, I think the problem of the postal sector has been liberalization, privatization, and really trying to cut costs in the postal sector as much as possible. And in the end, that is our feeling that in many ways, the services that is provided by the postal sector has been reduced through competition, through really cuts to services. And I think the message that we should get out of the COVID-19 crisis is we need a postal sector which actually works. It's a public good and that needs to be enhanced. So one of our key points in that regard is, rather than further liberalization, we should look together with the Commission and with the providers that the postal sector is really providing this public good, making sure that you get your goods when you want, you can send an email, you can send a letter when you want, and that these are really delivered on time. It needs to be reliable, and that is of key importance.
That should be also the moment I think this would be backed, or would get certainly some societal backing after these difficult times, and the importance of these parcel delivery services and postal services, as everybody recognizing the essential importance. If you had, dear Oliver, one wish in these difficult times, having a beer, having an ice cream, yes, but
I mean, there are things like this, definitely. No, I think the key point is, and my wish is that we all realize that we're in it together, and we only can get out of the crisis as one. And that means for me, as a trade unionist, as a social partner, that we really have to strengthen social dialogue, working together, employers and trade unions. And that means basically more collective rights for workers, because that means basically they are getting engaged in the world of work and really having strengthened collective bargaining. That is which we need to push, and the COVID-19 crisis shows that this is a way forward.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is also, of course, our views at CESI, and we would like, I take advantage of this interview to thank you and to thank UNI Europa. A last message to our CESI community from you, from UNI Europa.
Let's work together, because we want to create a new normal that really serves the interest of workers, their well-being, and make sure that our society is a society for everyone and not for the few.
Oliver, thanks a lot, and take care of yourself.
Thank you.